We're going to talk about today's prophecy as to what's going on in the world and some of the crisis that we've been seeing. Now, I have been talking ad infinitum about what I see going on in some of the countries of the world. Particularly, I pick on Turkey quite a bit because Turkey is so much in debt to the Western banks. And of course, once you get into debt, you have to repay that debt. And as their currency has fallen, their debt has risen, and of course becomes very onerous to repay that. And as we go into a global slowdown, which may be turning into a global recession, it becomes harder and harder for these countries to pay back their debt, which then leads to repudiation of that debt or debt default. I have been talking about the fact that it's very possible to see Turkey switch allegiances and betray the West and their NATO allies and start transferring over to China and Russia, and that's what we see. Paul has a biblical perspective. So, Paul, those are some of the issues that I see. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thought that you mentioned about Turkey turning from the West and turning toward Russia is consistent with what Ezekiel has written in chapters 38 and 39. And so when you look at the ancient names that are mentioned, these are essentially the grandsons of Noah coming out of the ark. And so the ancient names, Magog is one, that's modern day Russia, and we could spend a whole time talking about that. But the ones we're looking at relative to Turkey are Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Beth Dagarma. And those folks, when they settled in what is modern day Turkey, Armenia, the land between the two seas, between the Caspian and the Black Seas. And if you look in today's world, as Turkey turns from the West, they are turning toward their ancient brother, Magog, in the north, or modern day Russia. And so we see those things coming together from a geopolitical, economic, military standpoint. And you've written about this on many things that have been posted. Turkey's purchasing missile systems and other arms from Russia. So there's a definite military economic tie growing between those two countries, even though they don't necessarily get along, but that has been developing. And then the other piece of that puzzle would be modern day Iran or Persia. They will join in with Russia and Turkey. So in the short of it is, the reason they invade Israel is for economic reasons. And it's stated over and over, and I believe it's Ezekiel 38, 12, and 13, that they come to take spoil and plunder, goods, gold, silver, livestock. And the biggest enticement probably at this time has been the recent discovery of natural gas, just ridiculous amounts of natural gas off the Israeli coast in the Mediterranean Sea. And the ultimate intention of Israel is to distribute natural gas through Cyprus, which you and I have talked about. Turkey's tried to take Cyprus, and that will be distributed from Cyprus to what is modern day Thessaloniki, Greece. We know that in the Bible as 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, same town, and then further distributed on to Italy and the rest of Western Europe. And the reason, the significance for that would be is that that's where Russia and Turkey distribute their gas currently, is to Western Europe. It's one of their main customers. And so, with Israel entering the picture from a distribution standpoint, that's going to cut into Turkey's pocket and Russia's pocket. So there's economic reason for Russia and Turkey to invade Israel, to take spoil and plunder, as the text states. So that's where the Bible's coming from.
Well, we also see the fact that Turkey is facing into the boats that are exploring off the Cyprus coast, and Turkey is claiming a huge economic zone way past the internationally recognized borders to take advantage of gas claims in the Mediterranean that really belong to Cyprus, and they've been sending their military. So this is kind of what you're talking about, is it not?
This is exactly what's being discussed. And, the fact that Israel has formed an alliance with Cyprus to use Cyprus as kind of a distribution point for their natural gas. So, you can see where Turkey has a vested interest in what's taking place in Cyprus, to speak to your point.
And of course, we're starting to see the Turkish people suffer from this because as we watch their Turkish lira just drop, it was not more than 5 or 6 years ago, it was 2 lira to the dollar. Now it's close to 7 lira to the dollar, which means if you borrowed $100 million, now you're going to be paying back $350 million just because your currency has dropped. And of course, that unleashes enormous inflation in Turkey because everything that's not made in Turkey then is quoted in dollars. And it makes insulin expensive, that makes gasoline expensive, that makes any medicine or anything imported, machinery, goods, computers, all extremely expensive, which I think maybe also is a biblical tale, is it not?
It does. That comes into the situation, and some people will talk about Revelation 6, at the outset of what is the 7-year tribulation. And one of the hallmarks of that initial period is hyperinflation. And you can see just how you laid that out, how a strong dollar can cause inflation around the globe in which goods, and eventually it gets to a point where it will take a day's wage for you to eat, let alone the other things and other goods you talked about like gas, medicine, computers, etc. But just to eat, it's going to cost you a day's work to pay for food. Now, we're not there yet, obviously, but you can see, like you say, looking down the road, how a strong U.S. dollar can cause those things to happen.
So what is your thoughts if we see Turkey start to default, because they're certainly going to struggle with Western debt, as they just can't possibly repay this back. So debt is there's only 3 things you can do with it. You can pay it back, you can grow your way out, you can inflate it, or you can default it. So at this juncture, I just saw that PIMCO is talking about selling part of their sovereign debt portfolio. And of course, that's concern on not sovereign debt, but sovereign debt default. So what would be your outlook on something like that?
Well, from Turkey's standpoint, I would also look for them to maybe start a war. And they've already put troops into northern Syria. And then that dovetails into Jeremiah 49, where they start in the north and they work their way down through Hama, what is modern day Hamath. You see that in the scripture, and eventually down into Damascus and ultimately into Israel from the north near the Golan Heights. And so they've already started moving troops into that northwest corridor of Syria. And then recently they just reached an agreement with the United States to move in east of the Euphrates River. And they're going to start moving in troops there east of the Euphrates River. And their goal, as they say, as Turkey would say, is to rid the area of terrorists. Well, they consider the modern day Kurds terrorists, and they want to drive them all the way back to Iran is their stated goal. So I would expect Turkey to become more aggressive from a military standpoint, have a massive troop buildup in northern Syria, and ultimately try to push Kurds to the east and push Turkish troops south toward Damascus and ultimately into Israel along with Russia. That's what stands to reason, looking at today's climate, if you will, geopolitical climate, and then doing what they say they're going to do along with lining that up with what scripture says. That seems to make sense. Now, obviously many different things can happen, but you can see how those dominoes are in place and starting to be set up to where that seems to be a plausible outcome.
It seemed to me that not too long ago that Idlib, I believe, was one of the areas that Syria, that the Turkish forces were going to, and I believe we have a U.S. presence there. And I think that there was some friction between U.S. forces and, of course, their NATO allies, the Turkish forces. So this could be kind of a flashpoint, is what you're thinking, because the world is just waiting for we seem to be standing on a cliff, just waiting for someone to push us off. My thought is that this very well could be one of the flashpoints that ignites the world. What's your thoughts?
I think that seems very reasonable. I mean, even to the point President Trump has said he's going to withdraw those troops from that region. And that's the area just west of the Euphrates River in northern Syria. You also hear the city Manbij, Manbij, is also mentioned in that Idlib state province of Syria. Russia's also got their hooks in there real deep in this same area, and they have naval bases along the Mediterranean coast next to Idlib. All the players are there from a military standpoint, and kind of just as a trend, that is what has happened since about late 2015. The United States had a pretty heavy presence in this part of the world. In every place we have withdrawn military forces, a vacuum's created, and what has filled its place are the players that are mentioned in biblical prophecy. So, since then, Turkey's become prominent, Russia's become prominent, Iran's got a real strong foothold in this region as well, and becoming an increasing problem as far as the West sees it. So all these places where the United States is withdrawing, biblical prophecy, the players mentioned in biblical prophecy are taking its place. Now, does that mean this is the time? Well, not necessarily, but it's definitely interesting and worth watching when some of these things start aligning with what Scripture says.
Well, thank you very much for taking your time. It's just a pleasure. This is so exciting to get something like this. So we're going to wish you well, and with our heartfelt thanks to you. Bye-bye now.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Michael.